So another audit procedure, we have recalculation. So recalculation consists of checking mathematical accuracy of documents or records. So example, footing, so proving, meaning to say you are checking the mathematical accuracy of a schedule. That's what we mean by footing. So footing, you are checking the mathematical accuracy of summation of certain items. Now, like for example, expenses. There's expense 1 to expense 20. So you want to check the total. So whether the amount reflected in the schedule is correct. So that is footing or proving. So extension, similarly, summation in a row of data. For example, there's month 1, month 2, month 3, month 4. Then there's a total amount for those months. So that is the extension. You check also the mathematical accuracy. Okay, so you can also reconcile or agree between two documents. For example, the general ledger and the subsidiary ledger. So whether the amounts are the same between the two documents, or the balance per bank, the balance per book, uh, when it comes to cash in bank balance. So that is also an example of recalculation. So you can also calculate depreciation or amortization expenses, interest expense, interest income, pension expense, so prepayments, deferrals, whether the amount expensed or remaining as asset are correct. So those are examples of recalculation. And usually, this type of audit evidence is considered very reliable, okay, because it is the auditor who performs it. So another, for spreadsheets or electronic information, so we can also use computer-assisted audit techniques or CAATs. So because sometimes you need to recalculate voluminous or huge amount of data, or sometimes complex calculations are involved. So like for example, you are computing for let's say effective interest, okay? So wherein you need to determine so whether the interest expense or interest income recorded by the client are reasonable or correct, and that there's a huge amount of data involved, then you might need to use information or help of information technology. Okay, so we have a separate module, or you have a separate subject or course related to impact of technology in auditing. Okay, so in case we use CAATs, what we normally do is we obtain the electronic file so from the entity and use computer-assisted audit techniques to check the accuracy of the file calculations. Then we have Reperformance. So Reperformance is the auditor's independent execution of the procedures or controls that were originally performed as part of the entity's internal control. Okay, so for example, reperforming the aging of receivables. So the client has categorized the receivables based on the invoice date and the length of time from that invoice date on the time that aging is generated. Okay, so for you to check whether the client personnel correctly categorized, for example, the different invoices, so you can do it yourself. So to determine whether the process of the client is reliable. And when you do that, that is considered reperformance. The last type of evidence that we will discuss is confirmation. So confirmation is a specific type of inquiry, but the difference is that in confirmation, we obtain representation of information directly from a third party, like customer, like bank, like lawyer, legal counsel, consultant of the client. So we use this normally or usually in relation to an account balance, no? Like balance of receivable, balance of cash, but not limited to account balances. So because we can also confirm about agreements, about terms and conditions, for example, agreements with the bank, so terms and conditions related to a contract with the customer. So it's not limited to determination of account balance in the statement of financial position of our client. So these are the most common examples of items that are being confirmed in an audit. So although this list is not exhaustive, okay? So we normally confirm balances from banks of our client or financial institution from which the client had transactions with during the year. So we normally also confirm accounts receivables from customers. So shares held by third parties. So like for example, the client has investment in shares being kept by brokers or third parties. We can also confirm with those third parties. So property title deeds held by lawyers or financiers or even banks. So like for example, the company borrowed a loan from a financial institution using the title deeds of one of the company's property as collateral. So we can confirm that with the financier, with the bank. So investments purchased from brokers but are not yet delivered to the client as of balance sheet date. So loans from lenders. So accounts payable from suppliers. So we can also confirm status of litigation from lawyers or legal counsel. So those are some of the confirmation that we obtain during our audit. So this is an example of a confirmation request. So this time, this is a confirmation from a bank. Okay. So let's just examine this confirmation letter. Normally, what we do is that to ask the client to accomplish the form. So because we will be asking information about our client. So we must be authorized not to obtain information about our client to that related third party. Okay. So in this case, what happens is that there is a proper authorization from the client. However, it should be the auditor who should directly send the confirmation request to the third party, and also it should be the auditor who would receive directly the confirmation reply from the third party. So it should not course through the client. So meaning the client will be the one who will send the confirmation, and then we will get the confirmation request from the client. So that would not be reliable. So the third party should send the information directly to us. However, the client should authorize the auditor to obtain information about their business, about their transactions from the third party. So this one is another example of a confirmation request from the customer. So in relation to receivable confirmation. So this is an example of positive confirmation request. So in positive confirmation request, so we ask the third party, like the customer, to reply to the confirmation request that we have sent to them. Okay, so meaning to complete the confirmation procedure, so the respondent, the third party, should either agree with the given information or contest the given information. Like for example here, in our receivable confirmation, we ask the customer of the client, so to confirm whether the customer owes our client. So let's say here 1,250,000 as of December 31, 20x1. Okay, so to complete the procedure, the customer would reply. So whether the amount is correct or incorrect. So if the amount is incorrect, normally they will attach or include supporting documents to prove that the amount per record of the customer is actually correct or not. However, as auditor, we have to determine, we have to investigate further whether there's a difference between the amount indicated here in the confirmation and the amount that is being attested by the customer. Okay? So, one common reasons in practice is that sometimes the customer would not consider the date included here in the confirmation. So because we normally send confirmation after year end. So sometimes the customer would consider even those transactions after year end. So for example, if they paid the account on January and we confirm whether the customer has a balance of 1,250 as of December 31, 20x1, so the customer would be what we call this assertive that they don't owe anymore our client no amount of money when we send the confirmation, which is sometimes on the second week of January. Okay. So although what we are confirming is balance as of December 31, 20X1, so sometimes the customer would not actually look at the date, and they would want to state no how much their balance as of the date that we sent the confirmation, let's say second week of January. So we have to consider that information. So if the customer attach an official receipt indicating that they have paid on January 15, so it's fine, no? So that means that there is an existing receivable as of December 31 if they paid something after year end. So that would not be considered as an exception. Okay? So since the receivable is valid as of December 31. So those are some of the things that we have to consider when we evaluate evidence, no, like confirmation reply our from the customer of our client. So as I mentioned, no, one type of confirmation is the positive confirmation, where we ask the respondent to reply to the confirmation request. So the respondent, therefore, either should agree with the given information or contest the given information, or even fill in the information. In that case, that is considered a blank confirmation request. Okay? So the regular positive confirmation, like the one we have shown earlier in the previous slide, so that is an example of regular positive confirmation wherein the amount is given. Now, based on the balance of the customer's account in the books or in the records of our client. Now, take note that a response to a positive confirmation is expected to provide a reliable audit evidence. So, since it's coming from an independent source, no, the information came from third party. Okay. So, however, we have to be very careful because there's a risk that the respondent might not verify that the information indicated in the confirmation is correct. Now, like earlier in my example, the customer might not consider the date. No, they think that we are asking as of January 15, 20X2, no, instead of December 31, 20X1. Okay? Or it's also possible that the customer, when they saw the amount, 1,250,000, they feel that that is correct, they would just sign it and send it back to the auditor, no, without verifying the information against their record. Okay? So that is why one solution to that disadvantage for a positive confirmation is to auditor to use blank confirmation. So the auditor would reduce the risk that the information might not be verified by the third party if the auditor uses a blank confirmation. So instead of indicating the amount there, for example, 1,250,000 in the previous example, so you will omit entirely that amount. It will be blank. So it will be the customer who would fill in the information based on their accounting record. Okay, and that type of confirmation, blank confirmation, would be considered more reliable compared to the regular positive confirmation. Okay? However, the disadvantage of using a blank confirmation is that it could reduce the response rate on the part of the third party. So because in that case, there will be an additional effort required on the part of the respondent. So because they have to fill it in. So instead of just checking whether the amount indicated there is correct or incorrect. So that is why the auditor should use his or her professional judgment in determining the proper balance of the use of the blank confirmation and the regular confirmation request. Okay? And then finally, for negative confirmation, so we have positive confirmation request, we have blank confirmation request, and we have negative confirmation request. So in negative confirmation request, we only ask the respondent to respond only in the event of disagreement with the information provided in the request. So therefore, we ask the respondent, no, the customer, to only respond to us if ever there are discrepancy. If there are no discrepancy, then they do not need to respond to our inquiry. Okay. However, take note that non-response is not an explicit audit evidence that the respondent has received the request and verified the correctness of the information. So because there are many reasons why the third party or respondent will not reply, no, even if the information indicated there is incorrect. So it's possible that they have not received the request, okay? Or it's possible that they have received the request but they ignored it, okay? So that is why negative confirmations are considered less reliable. So compared with positive confirmation. And if ever we use negative confirmation, we have to consider performing alternative or other substantive procedures to supplement or complement our use of negative confirmation. And take note also that there are only circumstances, or the circumstances where we use negative confirmation are only warranted. So we can only use negative confirmation in the following situation. So number one, when the assessed risk of material misstatement is lower. So if the risk of material misstatement is high, we cannot use negative confirmation because as mentioned earlier, it is less reliable compared to positive confirmation. We also normally use negative confirmation if there is a large number of items involved, but with individually small or immaterial balances. So therefore, if the structure of the account of the client, for example, receivable, consists of few customers with significant amount of balances each, then negative confirmation is not appropriate. Okay? So we also use negative confirmation only when we expect a few errors. So a substantial number of errors is not expected. So connected here to the first one. So lower risk of material misstatement. And the last reason, we have no reason, or last criterion rather, the auditor has no reason to believe that the respondents will disregard the request. So only if these are present can we use negative confirmation. So by the way, this is an example of negative confirmation request. So please examine the statement below carefully. And if there are any differences, please report in writing to the auditor. So, but if none, then no need to respond. So that is an example of negative confirmation request. So next, what if management refused to allow the auditor to confirm to particular third party? So for example, we have chosen a third party, a customer, wherein we want to send confirmation. So, but the client prevented us to send confirmation to the third party. So we have to evaluate if the client has a valid ground. Okay. So if there is a justified reason not to send confirmation request to the third party. So like for example, there is an ongoing legal battle between the client and the customer, and when we send confirmation request to the customer, that might worsen the situation between the client and the customer, then that is an example of valid ground. Then we have to obtain alternative audit procedures. Like for example, we can check the litigation documents, no, instead of confirming with the customer. So, but if there is no valid reason, it's not justified, then it may constitute a scope limitation as we were not able to obtain sufficient appropriate evidence. So, we have to consider the materiality and significance of it in our audit opinion. Okay? So, finally, we have to maintain control over the process of confirmation. So, we have to select to whom the request will be sent. Now, it's not the client who will choose the respondents. It's the auditor who will choose the respondent. Okay? So, we will also be the one to prepare and send the confirmation request. Although, we are securing the consent first of the customer before we send the confirmation request. So there will be a signature of the authorized personnel in the confirmation request before we send it to the third party. So after we have prepared the confirmation request with the information that we need to get, so we have it accomplished by the client. Okay, so they will affix their signature there, the authorized personnel, and then they give it back to us, and then we send that to the third party. And we should also receive the confirmation request directly. Okay, so that is the reason why confirmation is also considered the costliest, no, or the most costly type of audit evidence. So because we have to pay in advance the cost of sending back the letter request to us. Kasi if we will ask the third party, the respondent, to pay for sending the information back to us, so that would be the reason for them not to send back the confirmation to the auditor. So that is why we normally shoulder the cost, no, of that confirmation. So in practice kasi, even if we have this email, normally confirmation requests are being done the traditional way, no, through what we call this registered mail. Okay, so although the use of email is already acceptable, but there are guidelines to be established by the firm on how we go about using email confirmation, so compared to using the registered mail. So usually while waiting for the registered mail, it's allowed for us to get information from email as advance info while waiting for the registered mail to arrive. So here are the steps in doing the confirmation procedure. So we send the confirmation request to the third party, to the respondent. If we did not receive a reply from the expected time frame based on our experience, we send second request. So for example, based on our experience, the customers normally respond within 1 to 2 weeks. So after 2 weeks, we haven't received any confirmation reply, we send a second request. And finally, if there is no reply from the second request, then that's the time that we perform alternative procedures. Like for example, in audit of receivables, if the customer did not respond after sending second reply, so we can check subsequent collections, because if the customer paid subsequently, that means there is a valid receivable. Okay, but disadvantage there is that if the payment does not indicate which invoice the customer is paying, so it will be difficult to identify if the customer is paying for a receivable existing as of year-end or for a receivable that arose after year-end. Okay? So another alternative procedure is to examine shipping documents, no? Invoice, sales agreements. So because if there are valid shipping documents, then that means there is a valid sale. And therefore, there is a valid receivable. Okay? So, but the disadvantage here is that we are relying on internal documents. So that is why our first priority still would be the confirmation. So we only use this as alternative procedure if we did not receive replies from our confirmation request. Okay, so again, confirmation is the costliest or most costly audit procedure. The cheapest is, of course, inquiry. So inquiry is the cheapest type of audit evidence. So to summarize the relationship of audit evidence to procedures. So for risk assessment procedures, the types of evidence that we obtain include the inquiry, inspection and observation, and analytical procedures. So for test of control, the audit evidence involved, we have inquiry, inspection, and observation. And sometimes we can also use reperformance. So for substantive test, so we use inquiry, inspection and observation, analytical procedures, recalculation, and confirmation.